And as a society, as Christians, first and foremost, we need to lead the charge, but we need to muster, people to our left and right, whether or not they go to church with us, and be like, we got to stop this, because where does it end? Like, they're killing our children right in front of us, and we don't care anymore. So kind of the call to action, the goal of this whole thing is just to start pointing out all these different facets where we Christians and in the world have absolutely abandoned common sense and God's law.
What would you do if the people in your life suddenly turned on you? Meaning, what if you had pledged your life, your very blood, to an organization expecting to defend against threats, only to discover that they considered you the threat? I can tell you what would happen to me. First, I'd experience some cognitive dissonance. Wait, me? We're on the same team. Surely you must be joking. But then when the reality set in that I had become the danger to defend against because of something invisible in my blood, the color of my skin, or even my religion, I'd have to make a choice. And this is the nature of the choice. First, to either agree with the organization that I had become the threat and do whatever they told me to no longer be the threat, or to trust my gut, to disagree, dissent, and thereby become the threat that they imagined me to be, and possibly do it alone. But here's the thing. The men who make this choice are never alone. Not really. Which brings me to my guest this week. His name is Asa Miller, and he's a former U.S. Navy SEAL intimately familiar with the scenario I just described, because he resisted the Biden administration's COVID vaccine mandate, standing up for what he believes in against an officer corps that had sold itself out to the regime, and he paid the price for it, being purged from a military that has determined its best warfighters are themselves enemy combatants simply because they represent the other side in a Marxist ideological battle. Welcome to 2024, ladies and gentlemen. Expect much more of this. But as I said, there's good news. Asa is one of the many veterans featured in the outstanding new documentary series SEALs Beat Biden, which is available now at the link in the description, free in exchange for an email address. I recommend it, because not only does it feature Asa, it also features many members of my church, Apologia, including Pastor Jeff Durbin and others. It's a gripping story, full of heart and real-world stakes. These were the men and women fighting the real-world battles most of us were only reading about. Maybe it wasn't overseas like he intended, but Asa has still managed to find himself on the front lines. In our conversation, we discussed the onset of the crisis, inside the military during COVID, the Christian purge of the military, Asa's shift from soldier to media figure, the military impacts of the vaccine, and finally, the erasure of the meritocracy. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. This is going to be a big year for the show with many new developments I'm very excited about. You can show people that you were a fan before it was cool by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, or leaving a comment down below with your questions or thoughts. Plus, share this episode or another one of your favorites with a friend. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, a former Navy SEAL featured in the new documentary series SEALs Beat Biden, Asa Miller. Asa, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I just want to say thank you so much for your contributions to the film SEALs Beat Biden. I remember, 2024 is coming up. We're recording this a couple days before New Year's. And my friends and I were talking last night about how 2024 feels like it's going to be a repeat of 2020, but a higher level of intensity almost. And so seeing the film and remembering all those heavy days took me back. And so I appreciated you standing up for the things that you believe in and how boldly you spoke in the film.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Not at the time, but since then, I'm glad that we had the team we had to fight.
Yeah. So can you take us back into, I think you said in the film that you were in Djibouti in Africa when all this sort of started coming down. Maybe can you take us a little bit back into some of those early moments when the first dawning worry started to surface of what was going on?
Yeah, so when COVID started, I was in my workup. It's basically the way the SEAL teams work is you have a 2-year workup. So for 18 months, you're training, and then the last 6 months of the 2 years, you go on deployment. And then it's just rinse and repeat. So when COVID started, when the first shutdowns happened and everything, I was finishing up that workup and I had about 6 months before deployment. So that was when, everyone just kind of got the stay at home orders, masks came out, the toilet paper was all gone, all that type of stuff. And so, I think everyone was kind of in this space of like, what's going on? No one had any ideas. And then we had about that 6 month period to start figuring out what was happening. Things started to return to normal a little bit, and then, or at least we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then I shipped out to Africa with my group of guys, right, and my unit, and so we're over there for 3 months, and we're down in southern Somalia, surrounded by locals on a daily basis. I was doing what we call partner force training, just going out there with the partner force, teaching them a couple things, how to shoot, how to drive, stuff like that. And these are all, for lack of a better word, like dirty people, right? They're sleeping on the ground. We
Yeah.
give them their food and stuff, but there's no hygiene. There's no cleanliness. And, this whole time though, we're fine, right? COVID just becomes an afterthought. It's not a big deal. We're kind of thinking about like, we watch Fox News or CNN a little bit and we're like, hey, our thing is going to be normal when we get home. Who knows? And then we got repositioned to this big naval base called Djibouti when Trump started trying to pull troops home. So he kind of tried to pull out of Syria. He started to draw down in Afghanistan, and we did the same thing. More or less all the Americans left Somalia, and we went to this massive naval base in Djibouti. Um, and then that's when COVID became a thing again.
Mm.
All of a sudden there was social distancing, even though we slept in a ship container together, in bunk beds. When we went to the chow hall to eat, the big Navy chow hall, we had to sit 6 feet apart from each other, and we couldn't sit across from each other at the table. We had to be staggered, and all this silliness, right? And so all of a sudden, we go from like life is normal again. We're out in the wilderness, cowboy ended up, to all of a sudden these ridiculous rules, right? And so that's kind of when some of the, when I'm a little contrarian by nature, and I'm like, wait a minute, okay, like this doesn't make any sense. Like I've been sleeping in a bunk bed with this guy for the last 3 months. Like I can eat across the table, right? And so that starts to develop for, we'll give it like a month and a half, something like that. And I went down to an outstation in Mogadishu, and the rest of my crew went to another station for a few days. And when they got back, a couple guys popped positive for COVID,
Mm.
and they're mostly asymptomatic. I think one or two guys had the sniffles, down for a day or so, still could perform the mission, obviously. But the Djibouti base just freaked out. All the senior military guys, on the regular Navy and our own command, freaked out and put everybody in solitary confinement, whether they tested positive or not, for 10 to 14 days. All their food was being brought to them in little styrofoam containers. For breakfast they were eating, I think I say in the documentary, it was like a boiled egg and
Yeah.
a sausage or something like that. And so while this is all happening, I'm getting sporadic texts as they catch, the last wave of Wi-Fi, saying how horrible this is. And I'm in Mogadishu spearfishing, having a great time, working out. So it didn't really affect me. And so to bring this, to answer your question, I get back to Djibouti a few weeks before we are supposed to head out home. And the guys who just got out of solitary are like, dude, like the rumor is like if you don't get vaccinated, these vaccines are coming out.
Okay.
If you don't get vaccinated, like you're not going to be able to get on military aircraft to go home. You might get stuck here in Djibouti. You might have to like extend your deployment with the next crew coming in. And we're like, what? Like vaccines? Like, why do we need vaccines? Like, I've already tested positive twice. I was asymptomatic. Like, I don't need this to get on an airplane and fly home. I just got on an airplane to fly here.
Mm.
And so I was like, no, like, not going to do it. I mean, there's a couple of us who had been in Moog, and we said no. But pretty much everyone else in my crew who had just been in this solitary confinement, the day the J&J vaccine came out, they went and got it because they just wanted to get home. We had guys who
Sure.
had just got married, babies on the way, stuff like that. So they get it, and we kind of had this joke like, "You'll get it. Like as soon as they turn you away from the airplane, you're gonna get it." And yet, come home just fine, get on the airplane, fly home, no repercussions. And then we had about a 6 month period between our final deployment and when we ramp up our training again. And I was going to a couple of schools. I went to my kind of my dream list school. And the whole time there's just like every few weeks they'll be like, hey, like if the FDA approves this, would you get it? Or if the government mandates it, would you get it? And every time I'm like, no, like there's no reason. But I can kind of see the writing on the wall, right? That hey, something's coming. They really want you to get these vaccines. And so me and a couple other guys, a couple Christian guys, and one guy, one of my good friends, he had just came to the Lord, kind of unrelated, but at that exact time. And thankfully for us, he has a background in sports science and everything, and so he's
Hmm.
really used to reading studies. So we all just started diving into this, scientifically through our faith, because with the aborted fetal cell issue, and just from at what point can the government tell me what has to go into my own body, what can be
Yep.
injected into me, right? And so, do we have bodily autonomy? So we started really digging through this for about 6 months before the mandate ever even came down. But yeah, sorry, I went on a little bit of a longer rant there than I
That's fine.
intended, but that's kind of the build up to the mandate, and through deployment. It just nothing was making sense, and everything seemed arbitrary, and didn't pass the sniff test.
I guess the thing that really stands out to me about that is the feeling that I think a lot of civilian Americans, including myself, had, which was that when COVID started happening, suddenly we all became the enemy, right? Like you're here, serving in the military overseas, and you suddenly become like an enlisted man become an enemy of your own superior officers. Like people get positive and everyone freaks out. It's like, wait, I thought we were all in this together. Why am I somehow now? Why am I the opponent inside my own base? I guess. So I mean, that must have been a really strange feeling.
Yeah, it is weird, and there's always a little bit of that rivalry between the enlisted ranks and the officer ranks. So at
Sure.
first maybe it wasn't completely out of the ordinary to be being told
Fair.
what to do, but
Yeah.
no, I think what it came down to though is our community, especially in the military, you like to be very scientific based, right? You like to be very logical. You want to be very focused on the mission, which is to be lethal, right? To destroy our nation's enemies and protect the homeland. And and none of these rules, none of these orders helped that. None, they tried to tell us that we were a risk to mission, risk to force. They tried to say that because we could get COVID, that we couldn't accomplish the mission. And as I was just telling you, we were at outstations with guys testing positive, and we were totally fine, ready
Right.
to work. And so it was just like, wait a minute, like you're sitting here, a colonel '06, something like that, captain in the Navy, and you're telling me I can't do my job when I'm doing my job. You're sitting in an office, you're at the Pentagon, you know, and yet I'm
Mm,
deployed, I'm doing my job. What do you mean I'm a risk to force? What do you mean I can't complete the tasks that I'm my nation requires of me? So that was when sort of that, like, wait a minute, like how can you tell me? It's like the salesman out there, in the streets making sales, and the CEO calls and it's like, everybody's got to come back to the office. You guys aren't doing your job, and it's like, no, I'm closing deals. Like, what do you mean?
right.
You're not out here with me. So that got very confusing very fast.
So was the feeling that you were getting that there was like genuine fear on their part, or was it feeling politically motivated, or what was the gut sense of what was going on there at the time? I mean, maybe different officers you'd get a different feel from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some people, I mean, it's just like anything today. They're the kind of useful idiots who just go along to get along, and then there are the people who you can tell have an agenda. And then in the middle, there's kind of those guys who are, they don't know how to do the research. Maybe they don't want to do the research, so they are a little, fearful, especially with all the mixed messages going on around COVID at the time. So it was kind of a broad spectrum. But I mean, I'll give you one example. We had our chief medical officer for all the East Coast based SEALs, which is about 50% of the force. He came in, he's an '06 at the time. He came in and he told us candidly in person, um, he told us that if he was a civilian, he would not get this vaccine because he thought it was dangerous. And he thought that at best, he thought there was no data to back it up. And this is our chief medical officer who's coming in, and then he follows all that up, agreeing with all the points we've laid out, all the data, and he comes out and he's like, "Yeah, I agree with you, but you have to do it anyway because somebody else told me." to tell you to do that. And it's
He's
just like,
honest.
wait a minute. Like, yeah, but I mean, even at the time, the Scandinavian countries had already paused vaccinations for, I think it was 18 to 25 or 32-year-old males because of the issues with cardiovascular health. And here
No
we
way.
are, all 18 to 32-year-old males. And we're like, wait, you're trying to vaccinate the entire United States military, the entire SEAL community, the entire nation, and we have threats in China and Iran and North Korea and all these places, and you're trying to experiment, because that's what this ultimately was. It was
Yeah.
experimental vaccine drug. You're trying to experiment on the entire military when other countries have already identified that the most at-risk personnel for the gene therapy are 18 to 32-year-old males, who is the backbone of the United States military. And so
Yeah.
that was just like, to answer your question, it was definitely a lot at the higher levels. It was very political from a vaccine standpoint. And then also, as soon as the Biden administration came in, well, we were on deployment as well. We actually had to go through mandatory white privilege training, where we
Oh,
had to sit down and get briefed on how we were born white, so that we're automatically racist and we have things better off than everybody else. And you're just sitting here like, wait a minute. Like, I thought we didn't judge people on the color of their skin. I thought, So the politics can't be taken out of this, unfortunately. And there's so much more to it than politics, but they can't be separated.
so watching some of these things unfold from the outside at the time, I remember having these thoughts that that must be what you guys are going through. But hearing you describe it from the inside is in a way so much more disappointing and sad and terrifying, because you get a sense that this is what's going on inside the military. And of course, as Americans, we're concerned about the well-being of the military, and their ability to fulfill their mission. But then to be again treated as the enemy by your own government that you're serving, because you have some magical asymptomatic disease that might kill you without symptoms, and you have to take this gene therapy, and then you're being persecuted actively for the color of your skin, like up close, and to actually hear it is that's tough to hear, but I mean important to hear, but like wow, I can't even begin to imagine.
Yeah. And it extends even beyond too. An important thing to bring in, which I know you'll appreciate, is the religious side. So not only is it,
Oh yes.
political, not only is it, medical and health, but it's also religiously. I mean,
Yeah.
recently there was a VA hospital just took out the Bible from the one of their memorials to fallen soldiers. They took the Bible out. And it's not, I don't think it's by design that so many of the people who resisted the vaccine were told by senior leadership to put in religious exemptions. And then those religious exemptions were then blanket denied almost to a man. Um, and it's a purge, is what it is. They want to get rid
Mm,
of white people for some reason. They want to
mm.
get rid of politically conservative, or at least just common sense people who would think for themselves and make a decision based on common sense, and they want to get rid of Christians, um, and that's what we're seeing to this day.
Well, there it is, right? That is the inevitable conclusion of what's going on. Again, that's my own speculations, but again, experiencing it firsthand within the military is like, yeah, this is what I personally experienced. It's not a report that I read on some website somewhere. Like this is your experience. Um, so you do think it is ultimately a purge? Because I know that people debate whether it's a purge or whether it's an attempt to all out collapse the military, perhaps. Maybe the two are the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think they are the same thing in one way or the other. I mean, whether or not it's actually an attempt to destroy our nation from a sense of trying to take it over, like from an outside force, I'm not really there, but I will say you need there in the military. You need a certain amount of rules and regulations and good order and discipline, right? Especially in conventional large forces where you have tens of thousands of troops who are being moved across the battlefield. Like, you need some order and regularity. um, However, warfare is changing, and so much of war now is either, cyber or drone strikes or special operations. And in order to be a special operator, whether you're in the community or you're attached to it, supporting it, you have to be able to make decisions on the fly, right? You have to be
Hmm.
trusted to at the lowest possible level. You have to delegate authority. That's what's taught. That's not just me saying this. This is what's taught, in all the military doctrines, small unit tactics. You have to delegate authority to the lowest common, denominator, so that those individuals can make that decision in the heat of the moment, because sometimes you won't have communication back to the general or whatever. And yet, so while warfare is moving more and more towards small units who can be trusted to make game time decisions, you're also getting rid of all the people who can be trusted to have the integrity and common sense to make those decisions. So, you know, is it a collapse of the military? I mean, maybe as an institution, it'll be a visible institution, but of the people on the ground who can actually make and be trusted to make ethical decisions, moral
Mhm.
decisions, decisive decisions, yeah, I mean that those days they're not gone, but they're headed that way.
So in the documentary, I think you said did they call Christianity a rattlesnake religion? Was that what they called it?
Yeah, so a bunch of the guys went into this meeting, and I was actually working somewhere else at the time. I didn't make it to that meeting, and our two master chiefs, which are the senior enlisted rank in the Navy as a whole, and then it was one was the current senior enlisted advisor, is what we call them, sort of for the command for all the East Coast SEALs, and the other one was the incoming. Um, the soon to be, to replace the current, and they came in just super upset, and they, one of the things they said was, we don't want to hear about your rattlesnake religions. And I don't think
Mhm.
that he knew much about what he was talking. So he didn't expound on what he was talking about, but probably 98% of the people in that room were Christians. So I mean, there's no you know Nordic religious people, no Jedi's in the room. I don't know what kind of rattlesnake religions he could have been talking about if it wasn't Christianity. Um, but yeah, they didn't want to hear. They didn't want to hear about our religious accommodations. Basically, is what he was getting towards.
When you came into the military, did you find that it had a more amenable posture towards religion in general? Was that a shift, or was it generally, inside special forces and inside the military, was religion laughed at, mocked, or was this a big shift in the attitude that you felt towards religion?
No, I think it was a shift, and beforehand, and this is honestly a knock on myself too, and a lot of my friends, we've identified this, is there was actually a huge group of Christians in my platoon, which is kind of the small level unit that you operate in, and then also at my SEAL team and around the community and the military at large. There are a lot of Christians in the military. In my personal kind of group of guys, I think it was very individualistic. Like, I think everyone knew I was a Christian. I think I knew who a lot of the Christians were. We would maybe go to, church on, Sunday morning on deployment together, every other week or something like that. But it, not by force, but just by choice, which is again a knock on us,
Mhm.
that we're just, hey, I'll read my Bible in the morning, and that's it. But no one really like puts you down for it. The culture can definitely be kind of non-permissible for Christian values, so that was something that
Mhm.
you have to struggle through. But it wasn't like a persecution by any means. And then um, when the religious accommodations started coming out, when people started applying for them, that's when you saw a huge push from senior leadership. And in fact, David Yonts even talks about it in the documentary. He talks about how chaplains were instructed, given kind of a question sheet, to lead people away from religion and try to picket them into this, try to pin them in a corner of just being
Mhm.
political. Just because you're a conservative Christian means that it's all political. Your religious beliefs aren't actually that sincere. So that the shift really happened. I think Christians as a whole in culture have been kind of individualistic, kind of kept it to ourselves, and
Mhm.
that has allowed um, kind of this. It allowed the groundwork to be laid, so that when push came to shove, they had the levers in place to pull to persecute us. Really.
That's yeah. It's funny that you say that because I recorded a podcast that was kind of about that just yesterday. It'll be out the week before everyone listens to this one, about how it seems to me coming into Christianity at this stage in my life that for the past, I don't know, say 50 or so years, most of Christian culture production has been inward facing, Christians speaking to Christians about Christian things, not Christians speaking to the broader American culture about Christian things, not preaching and proclaiming the gospel. It's like, we'll just keep this to ourselves. And that approach, whatever motivated it, whether it was fear or pietism or who knows, right? I wasn't around for it, did allow all of these anti-Christian, non-Christian, and ultimately anti-Christian values to spread that Christians now find themselves embedded in and that have turned on them.
Yeah. And it's so unfortunate. And I mean, one of the reasons of Seals beat Biden, the kind of the goal. This first episode has been very heavy on the vaccine, kind of the backstory. But the next two episodes, I'm really excited for them to come out in the next few weeks, over the next month or so. Is it kind of starts making the connection to, okay, this was the vaccine problem, this is the backstory, and now this is where the military is headed, and this is also how it connects to society as a whole. And kind of as you're talking about, the church being so individualistic and not, hey, we'll do Christian things inside the church and then we go home and then it's the rest of, secular society or whatever, which is a myth. But
Mm.
I fell into that trap absolutely until the last few years, and this kind of forced me to come out of that and open my eyes and see. But I mean, you see the trend in the military is going all left wing, ideological. It's a huge shift. And so, for example, I'll give you an example. General Milley, the former Joint Chief Chair, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, the former, he tried to say that the existential threat to America is climate change, which is this religion of the left, right? I mean,
Yep.
sea levels are supposed to rise zero point 0.1 inches over 100 years or something. Bill Gates, the backer of all this stuff, he's building mansions on the beach in Miami, and yet our global threat, the thing that could destroy America is climate change, who, left wing radicals, bow down to and worship like it's a god, nature,
Yes.
Queen Gaia. And
Yep.
and then we also have abortion, which for the longest time, Tommy Tuberville was holding the line super strongly in the Senate on stopping promotions from automatically being kind of approved over the abortion issue, which, the DoD has been circumnavigating federal law, which prohibits the funding of abortions by giving service members free leave to go across state lines if the state they're in restricts abortion, paying them for their travel, reimbursing them for their travel, and giving them extra leave to go across state lines and abort their children. And so
Wow.
you ask, and so you got this climate change push, you got this abortion push, you got transgender surgeries, people getting free genital mutilation in the military, getting to stay in deployable billets, but not deploy, not do their job. So you see this massive shift. You can't call it secular anymore. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
pagan is what it is, right? And it's because Christians have so removed ourselves and we're so afraid, and especially Christian political, um, conservative politicians, we're so afraid to declare Christ as Lord, right? We're so afraid to say, hey, no, like we have a standard, the Word of God, and we have to follow along with this. And because we've gotten so far away from that in our politics, in our society, in our military, we have no standard left to hold people accountable. And so Seals beat Biden, a long-winded answer or comment is Seals beat Biden wants to point to all these different aspects of the issue. It's not just a vaccine. It's not just a gene therapy. It's a complete lack of accountability for leadership. It's a complete lack of um, lawfulness by senior military leaders who are finding every way they can to force medical experimentation illegally on people. They're trying to force abortions on people. They're trying to mutilate people's genitals. And as a society, as Christians, first and foremost, we need to lead the charge, but we need to muster people to our left and right, whether or not they go to church with us, and be like, we got to stop this, because where does it end? Like, they're killing our children right in front of us and we don't care anymore. So kind of the call to action, the goal of this whole thing is just to start pointing out all these different facets where we Christians and in the world have absolutely abandoned common sense and God's law.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. It's very needed. It's very needed. And I think the oddest thing, of course, there are many things about this era that are very odd, but I think the oddest thing is the way that we've built all these institutions to serve humanity, and then the institutions were all captured at certainly at the highest level across the board, every institution, including the military, and then the institutions have turned on humanity, and so you have the common people, very much in opposition to what these institutions are doing, and you experience that inside the military. You have the enlisted men sort of against the officers. The officers are promoting agendas, plural, that are completely contrary to the values of the enlisted men and essentially blackmailing them with different forms of punishment. And you have the whole capitulation dynamic, like, okay, I'll just get it just to get along and go along. And it's very troubling. It's very troubling. And to hear the way that Christianity's cultural failings have kind of enabled that. Um, I think it's an important message that people need to hear, especially heading into 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone says this election is the most important election, right?
Yeah.
I haven't been through many of them, but I can, the two or three that I've paid attention to in my life, I hear it every time. But that being said, I mean, I just you look at things from our economy to every topic we've already hit on, and you look at overseas, we have still the Ukraine war going on, hundreds of thousands of people dying. You look at the
Right.
Afghanistan withdrawal a few years ago, so many people died, and I mean, women and children are being abused, raped, mutilated, still to this day. Then you look at the Red Sea. We have missiles and drones, getting shot at commercial ships, and we have a lot of problems leading up to
Hmm.
this election. And I mean, I just I don't want to see America have to actually, like, everyone blanket across the board suffer before we wake up. And so the goal is, like, everyone's feeling the pain right now, but can we use the pinpricks that everyone is feeling, um, to wake us up before we lose it all? Because I think it's reversible. I think it's definitely reversible. Um, but I don't know how much longer it will be reversible, if we
Hmm.
don't do something about it.
So I guess, did you ever expect that you would find yourself, enlisting in the military, becoming a special forces operator? Did you ever expect that you would become a media figure? Was that ever on your list of intended directions for your life, or has it kind of been a little bit of a surprise?
No, definitely not like this. I'll say that. If you talk to my friends and family, like, I've always liked politics. I've always liked,
Hmm.
that type of stuff. And my dad was, very not involved, but very passionate, I guess, growing up. So I always saw myself maybe delving into it one way or the other, but definitely not going on podcasts. And, I've been on Epic News one time, and that was so crazy for me. I got, 5 minutes on TV. So it was not my plan by any means. And actually, when we started this, I wanted to do 20 years in the military. My dad did
Hmm.
27 years in the Marine Corps. I joined at 18. I could have retired at 39 and, had a pension the rest of my life and kind of dabbled in whatever I wanted to. So that was very much my goal. And when this whole thing started and we started pushing back, we had opportunities to go on Tucker and Sean Hannity. In fact, Hannity didn't air our story because he wanted to have one of us SEALs go on there, and we told him no, and we told Tucker no. Um, Even though it would have caused a massive firestorm in the media, I'm sure we could have fundraised like crazy, but we said no because we were all hoping that we could stop the mandate and then go back to work. Um,
Oh, wow.
and so we didn't want to reveal our faces. We didn't want to go public. We wanted to keep doing our job, right? But so we had Davis Yance go on Tucker, thank goodness, and that created enough pressure to, after a year-long fight, get Congress to come in and do a little something, which just in the NDAA of last year, they basically just ended the mandate, but that was it. They just said you can no longer blanket mandate the vaccine, but they didn't do anything to address the 8,500 service members who had already been discharged, many of whom got, either dishonorable discharges, which is basically making you a felon. You can't own a gun. It makes it very hard to get jobs. A lot of other people got different versions of the discharge. Some had to pay back, including one of my friends. He had to pay back, over $10,000 in bonuses because he got kicked out after reenlisting, and we get large reenlistment bonuses. And he gets kicked out before he wanted to be, and now he has to pay all that money back. But Congress hasn't done anything, and the courts haven't done anything to rectify that problem. So to bring it full circle, no, I didn't want to be a media figure. I didn't want to be going on all these podcasts, but I saw an opportunity to help fight for those people who had been kicked out, for the 250,000 service members who were threatened with getting kicked out, and the millions of Americans who were in this fight with us. And I had the opportunity to kind of be a voice, in my own small way, to try and bring some pressure and bring awareness. So that's honestly why I'm doing this, is because I hope that, using the connections that we were able to make, using, platforms like yourself, which I'm so thankful for you bringing me on here, we can
My
just start
pleasure.
bringing the pieces together, and giving people the, kind of the little bit of knowledge and the direction to go. Call your senator, call your congressman, say like, hey, why have you done nothing to to rectify 8,500 people's lives being ruined, plus their
Mhm.
wives and their children. So that's why I'm doing this. To be honest with you, and it would, if I could rewind time, I would stop this from ever happening, and I'd serve 20 years in the Navy.
I definitely respect you stepping into it so boldly, making that shift. You must get a lot of emails of support. It must be nice to read those. Like, what is it like hearing from your fellow service members, knowing that like you're the guy speaking up on their behalf?
Uh, I don't get too many emails, to be honest with
Okay,
you. I've gotten some support, and some comments on Twitter and stuff, and that's nice. But it's a very weird thing, to be honest with you, for a guy like me coming from my community to go public. There's, people know the Jockos of the world, the David Goggins,
sure.
um, but it's not something we kind of pride ourselves in being. We call it silent professionals. We kind of pride ourselves in not going public. With things, and trying to, monopolize and on our past. And so and while I don't think that's what I'm doing, and I try to communicate that and clearly, and I try to show, hey, this isn't about me being a SEAL, this isn't about me being in the military or whatever, this is about what senior military leadership and politicians are doing to ruin the military. And I want to make sure that other people, next generation, can come through and get to live the life that I did for a bit and wanted to
Mhm.
live. And so that's kind of the message I'm trying to portray. But honestly, it kind of goes back and forth. Sometimes, I've had a few phone calls with some buddies who are like, "Dude, what's going on? Like, why are you doing this?" And
Oh wow.
and so and a lot of that was before the documentary aired. So I think as people see the documentary and they kind of see the message that we're getting at. I think it'll change some opinions, but it's actually, I know, contrary to what you might believe, it's a little nerve wracking going public, because it's kind of frowned upon, to be honest with you. So not not exactly, there's not the emails of support that you might think.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah,
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 that makes sense. I had heard from others about the silent professional thing, that it can be looked oddly upon if you go public, become a media figure. Certainly, though, you get the support of some of your friends and the people around you for speaking up on behalf of these really challenging issues.
absolutely. And there's a huge group of guys who support. There are 20 other dudes from my team, who a lot of them are actually back at the same team working. And so I do get support. It's not like I'm a lone ranger out here. That's not what I'm trying to say. But
Right, right, right.
it is it's a little bit of a balancing game. Obviously you can't please everybody. But the truth is the truth, and somebody's got to say it. So that's my goal.
So I started attending Apologia Church, I think around the time when you started talking to Pastor Jeff Durbin, and that he was referencing that he was speaking to Navy SEALs but couldn't give their names, and so maybe that was all happening around the same time. Are we talking like early 2022, late 2021, something like that?
Yeah, so I think it was late 2021.
Yep.
I think it was about September, October timeframe, September, I believe, where they officially, like, kicked us off of our SEAL team.
Oh,
Just my SEAL team in particular. Everyone handled it differently across community, across the Navy, across the DoD. but we got kicked out of our team, basically out of our platoons in September. And we, at that point, we were really worried about what to do because we didn't really know about religious exemptions. We didn't know about the medical exemptions and all that. And we definitely didn't have lawyer friends. And so there's pretty much just 21 of us dudes who were like, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so thank goodness, thank God, honestly, one of my friends, he had his old pastor from Louisiana was connected with the Apologia guys, and through one godsend after another, the Apologia guys knew Zach Lautenschlafer over at the Sentinel, and he kind of has his toe, in the political game. And then I forget the exact connections, but basically between Zach, we were able to pull in a lawyer from Bradley Pierce from Texas, who's a
Mm-hmm.
constitutional lawyer, and then we were able to pull in an active duty or a reservist, JAG, Davis Younts, and so
Mm-hmm.
they all just kind of swarmed one day to an undisclosed location in Virginia Beach, and we brought in all the guys who were unvaccinated, a bunch of our friends who were, and were confused about what we were doing, friends, family, all that kind of stuff, and we had a big meeting for like 12 plus hours, I think it was, where they kind of laid out, hey, this is what we're hearing. We could potentially get charged with mutiny. We could be put in a brig as other people were being put in the brig. We could be dishonorably discharged, pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of training. Like,
Oh,
these are all the
wow.
threats that are circulating right now. What do we do? And then we kind of just, we had a whiteboard up, and we just game planned. We just wrote down, hey, what's going on? Like, what is the solution? What are we looking for? We want to go back to work. Okay, like, how do we get from everything, the walls falling in on us, to going back to work? And we just drew out a game plan, um, and thankfully it worked to a certain degree. Um, but yeah, it was crazy. And so one of the big guys there was the Apologia staff, and they gave us a bunch of encouragement. They laid out a lot of just kind of theological advice, honestly, on worldview, on like, hey, doctrines of the lesser magistrate was a big thing that I'd never heard
Mm-hmm.
about. All of it, and so they were a huge help for us.
That's really funny to kind of come full circle for me because that was when I started attending Apologia, and that was when Jeff was talking about working with the SEALs about the vaccine mandate. That was one of the ways that I knew Apologia was a legit church. I was like, okay, like it was the first time I'd ever really attended church before. I was recently baptized, new believer in 2020, and Apologia was the first church I ever really attended. And I was like, well, I don't. I know that this church stayed open through COVID. That's a good sign. They
Yeah.
got a pretty vocal statement of faith on the website. It's another good sign. And the way that I heard about Apologia was because they were doing an anti-abortion protest at the state capitol. I'm like, any church that's doing that is a legit church. So I'm like, okay, there's some green flags here. But then when I heard that he was working with some unnamed Navy SEALs on the religious exemption for the vaccine mandate, I'm like, okay, I think I'm at a good place. So it's
Yeah.
funny to come full circle and find that you were one of those SEALs.
Yeah. No, that is very interesting, and they are a great church. I've been so blessed by them. I haven't yet been
Mm.
to one of their services yet, but I've gotten to know a few of the pastors over the last few years. But that's really interesting. I've heard a little bit about your testimony, but I just want to ask you, what
Yeah.
was that like, becoming to Christ in COVID? Did you feel like your morals and values and worldview just didn't align with what was going on already, or was it like a complete 180 shift? Like, because you mentioned the abortion thing, but for a new believer, I mean, I know so many believers who, or people who profess to be
Mm.
Christians, who are pro-abortion, or at least think like, okay, I wouldn't do it, but they can. So that's just interesting for me to hear, like, a new believer being maybe passionate about abortion. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Oh, sure. I would say that my values had already made a big 180 from traveling and being overseas. Like I had already gone from being pretty liberal when I lived in San Francisco to being pretty conservative when I got back to the United States, which I mean, you've been to Africa, right? You kind of
yeah.
see how the rest of the world lives and you're like, oh wow, America is pretty great. And we really don't have a whole lot to complain about. So that had shifted a lot of my values. And the big question that was running for me at the start of 2020 was I had explored all these other world religions and I couldn't get a good answer about the existence of evil. Like all these other world religions are all is one. So if all is one, then like evil is also God. Like how does that make sense? Then how can you say that anything is anything? How can we make any value judgments? And no one would talk to me about that. So it was in early 2020 in February when COVID started happening. I was reading the book Simply Christian by N.T. Wright, which was a gift to
Mhm.
some of my friends. And he talks about evil in that book. And so I'm reading this book as COVID is starting to happen and lockdowns are starting to happen. So now I'm seeing evil on this societally wide scale. So by the time that time in September, I finally got baptized, COVID had actually played into that. Like, oh wow. So now it's not these just academic discussions about, evil, interpersonal evil, or even governmental, corruption. Now we're looking at what was very clear to me, because the vaccine push was very clearly a whole part of that from day one. My friends and
Yeah.
I were talking. We're into some quote unquote conspiracy, or like what might call future news topics, right?
Yeah.
Conspiracy is just news plus 6 months, right? So, so it was really clear from the beginning that, okay, we can see where this is going. So I saw that already. And so by the time I did come to Christ, all my values were completely aligned by that point, and COVID helped push them there.
Interesting. That's awesome in a sad way. But it's funny you bring up that traveling the world brought you more or less to Christ, or at
Yeah.
least to conservative viewpoint, and because it's kind of proof for something I've been saying for the last 2 years is I wish if I had one genie wish, right, it would just be I could take every kid on a college campus plus or minus like 2 years and just take them on a field trip through Africa and
Yep.
just be like, look what other what look at not only what areas of the world that don't have Christ are like, but also look at even if you don't come to Christ, like obviously that's my arch goal, but even if you don't come to Christ, like look at the blessings that capitalism and America have to offer, and
Hmm.
stop burning it down. Stop throwing
Yep.
bricks through cop cars. Like, do you want to be, going to the bathroom, on the sidewalk outside, which the sidewalk is just the dirt, road? Like, that's what so much of the world is like. And that's what living, in a non free market, Christian based Western society world is like. And I just wish I could just take every kid from, 18 to 25 and just walk them around Africa one time. And apparently it
Hmm.
works. It worked for you.
It did. It did. Oh yeah, you go and you try, I've been to South America. I haven't been to sub-Saharan Africa, but I have been to Morocco, which is in Africa on the continent. I've been to India and Asia, and you can get on a plane and fly to India, and you will be confronted with like, this is what a lot of the world really is like. There's no tourist
Yeah.
bubble in India. You are confronted with India from the second you get off the plane. And
Mm,
so you can really see and you don't have to travel too far out of a place like New Delhi to get a sense of what the rest of the world is like outside of the values of and the prosperity and the peace that has been created by the Christian West. And the thing is, very few Americans have passports, because America is an enormous country, like physically, geographically enormous, and so it's expensive to get to a meaningfully far away distance. You have to cross an ocean, basically. Great for
yeah.
military strategic advantage, not so good for travel. So a lot of people
Yeah.
just don't have passports. But then when a lot of people do travel, the only place they go to is Europe. They don't go they don't go to China. They don't go to India. They don't go, through some of the places of South America. And so they just see what they believe is a more refined version of America. Why can't America be like Paris? Like, well, because America and Paris are both outgrowths of the same set of philosophies and theology. Go to places where that isn't the case, and you learn real quick that the West has been blessed immeasurably, and now we're
Yeah.
we're squandering it.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
I
It's
actually
cool
wanted it.
testimony.
Thank you. I actually wanted to read. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I wanted to read something that I read in Scripture this morning. It's at the end of Joshua. Joshua chapter 24. It's after the Israelites have crossed the Jordan and conquered. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel." This is chapter 24, verse 13. "I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves, which you did not plant." And I think there's something, and then of course, this is a warning about, that God's warning, like, you're all going to become idolaters. I see it coming
Mm,
already. And I think we see a lot of that we, including you and I, and many people, are living in a civilization that we didn't build. And naturally, and not to mention people that are being imported into the country, etc., but they're living in a civilization that we didn't build. And it's so easy to take that for granted. And I think there's a lot of that happening now.
absolutely. And to take it back just real quick to, a microcosm of that, which is the institutions. You talked about the institutions being taken over, whether it's, everyone knows the universities have, but the military, it
Mm,
makes me think of the military was designed to be a merit-based system, right? You can experiment, the free market, all of that is out in, the in regular society, free society, but the military is strictly what works, what's proven to work. We keep it simple, stupid
mm,
simple, and it's a meritocracy. If you are good at your job, if you're a good tactician, if you're lethal, then you get promoted, right? And that is the system that we built. And you just next man up mentality, right? You go through boot camp, everyone goes through, it's pretty much the same thing, and then you work your way up through merit basically. And yet we have this system that worked, and we've brought in all of these, college educated, to go back and harp a little bit on officers on it,
mm. Do
intentionally,
it.
unintentionally, but they get a 4-year degree, whether it's university, through ROTC, or whether it's, the military academies, which are proven, through studies to be pushing things like CRT and everything else. And you come in 4 years of college, 22 years, bright eyed, bushy tailed, and now you're in charge of, the 22, 25, 30 year, veteran, and you're making the decisions, and you're coming into these cities, you're coming into these vineyards that have already been built, you're gifted. And what are you going to do with it? Are you going to continue on, not, stagnant, stuck in your ways? I'm not saying the military shouldn't innovate in certain ways, but if instead of coming into those cities, pre-made cities and vineyards, and just mending them and watering them and nurturing them, if you come in and you're like, okay, now we're going to do racial quotas because we're so not racist that we're going to be racist against white people, and we're only going to bring in black people and women to be pilots. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what if that's not necessarily wrong, but what if the best person for the job, what if the best pilot would have been this white guy, or this Asian guy, who are also being proven to be discriminated against because of their high test scores, um,
Hmm.
if that's the best person for the job, and our duty is to protect and defend, like, that's who you want. We don't want to bring in this person who has all the worst test grades, but they fit the minority stereotype we want to push, because now they don't know how to handle the vineyard, they don't know how to handle the city, and it falls apart. And that's what we're seeing. That's a perfect verse. I'll have to go read that myself. You said Joshua 24.
Yeah, it's at the end of Joshua 24. It's Joshua 24. Literally just read it this morning, actually. 24,
Yeah,
verse 13. Yeah, it's just before Joshua dies.
yeah, that's
I
interesting.
think, I think that the focus today is not so much like on the vineyards themselves and cultivating them to greater fruitfulness. Speaking metaphorically, it's like the real battle that so many people are so fixated on fighting is the gender and ethnic makeup of the workers in the olive fields. It seems it's very odd. Like, aren't we supposed to be cultivating prosperity instead of fighting this ideological battle? It's like it's taking you know what it is? It's taking the blessings profoundly for granted. Like, here is this olive field which you didn't plant, and rather than how can we make it bear more fruit, we need to make sure that the right proportion of workers are the ones tending it. And we'll forget about the fruit. We don't actually need those. And the olive
Yeah,
field, it kind of rots as a result because people are focusing on the wrong war.
yeah. And that's what I mean. Call it sin, call it Marxism, whatever you want. Like, that's
Yes.
what it is. You have to have you have to have your storehouse full. You have to have the money to afford socialism, communism. You have to have built up the vineyards before you can, you know, leech off the built up wealth, to try and implement all these crazy ideologies that are going to eventually destroy us and have destroyed everyone else who's ever tried them. Um, and man, it's so clear and obvious, and yet so deceptive to so many people. And it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know the exact answer on how we stop it, but the best way I can do it is just by talking about it and telling the stories and making the connections.
So let's talk about, what some of the men and women listening can do to help the SEALs Beat Biden mission, to help you. Like what sort of action can we be taking in our everyday lives, online and off, let's say.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first and foremost, the beginning of knowledge is fear of the Lord, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, get in your Bible, read it. I mean, make the connections. Don't just read the words in front of you. Think about them, meditate on them. Be like, how does this apply to me today? Um, and then from there, I think the two things that everyone's been told growing up not to talk about are religion and politics. And I just encourage people talk about religion and politics every opportunity you get. Don't rant about it. Don't try to
Right.
force things on people, but just talk about it because honestly, like all this comes down to common sense. And if you just think about it, if you do a little bit of reading, if you have a question, if you hear something I said, you don't agree with, just Google it for 30 minutes, and I bet you'll find some interesting stuff. And then lastly, my point being, gain knowledge, right? Just read the word, read information, not news sites. And then as you start to develop these through conversation and reading, um, I would just ask you reach out to your local congressman, reach out to your local state reps, find an issue that you're passionate about. A lot of people, apologia, their thing is abortion, and that's a huge topic that we can fight on. For me and the guys in the military, we need to be calling and talking to our congressman every day, saying, "Look, there were 8,500 service members illegally discharged because they've refused to be experimented on. And there are
Yeah.
250,000 who are going to get kicked out over their faith. And Congress isn't doing anything to make that right or to prevent it from happening again. And I think that's what's most scary is, bygones might be bygones, but the future is still hasn't happened yet. And nothing's been done to um, stop these issues from coming up again. So we need congressional action, we need state level action, and we just need knowledgeable people so that next time something like this happens, it isn't 21 SEALs stepping up to fight it. It's millions of people across the nation. And the only way we get there is by people being knowledgeable and fearing God more than man.
Is anything softening at all given all the people who quote unquote died suddenly and the news coming out about the vaccine and DNA that's in there? Like there is some real hard mainstream science now. I mean, not that mainstream is the authoritative, but the mainstream is acknowledging that the vaccines were dangerous or there were contamination, and you really can't hide the videos of people dropping dead. In fact, like I talked to my health insurance agent a couple weeks ago because I lost my wallet. I found it, but I needed to reorder my cards, and he wanted to renew my plan. And he just mentioned offhand, casually. I didn't ask. He's like, "Yeah, ever since COVID, like so many cancers and different diseases are springing up. Like I didn't bring it up. He just said that the health insurance companies are really struggling with the increase of really dangerous illnesses that appears to have quote unquote come out of nowhere." Is that information softening things at all within the military? Like, is that making anything easier, or are they still going hard in the paint over this?
No, they're still going as hard as they can.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
I got 3 points I'm going to hit on real fast before I forget.
Do it.
I have some stats in my notes here. I'll read off. In the military, you were talking to your health insurance. This is stats gathered by one of the whistleblowers from IDCs, which are kind of the hospital, top of the line corpsmen in the Navy. Strokes over the past year or two, strokes have gone up in the military 43%.
Wow.
Ovarian dysfunction has gone up 34%. Disseminated intravascular coagulation, rare condition that leads to blood clots, has gone up 782%.
What?
Abnormal findings in organs and tissues have gone up 165% over the last 2 years. Slips, trips, falls, 1,096%. And
Oh my
cancer and
god.
digestive organs, 26. And then there's a couple other, but testicular and breast cancer, 15%. So same thing with your health insurance findings. Like the military, so we have all these numbers. This is not just mainstream media. Like this is health numbers. You know, going up like crazy. All these issues going up, and yet Davis Yance just was fighting a case where they tried to take someone who had submitted a religious exemption, had fought the vaccine, didn't have to get it. They tried to station them in a billet overseas in a country that was requiring the COVID vaccine. And so now he's getting court martialed again to try and force him to get the COVID vaccine when they could easily have picked one of the, 90 something percent of the military who has the COVID vaccine. They could have easily picked them and sent them to that billet. They specifically chose this unvaccinated person to try and continue to persecute them. So yes, they're still going hard in the paint. Um, and then I forget my third topic I was going to bring up on that, but yeah, I mean it's crazy. And so another action step you could do, Davis Yance, he has repurposed the nonprofit we use to fundraise for our own legal defense. It's called Stand with Warriors, and he's repurposing it to kind of be a proactive, not only legal defense group, but also kind of a training and community group as well. So they're going around getting with, right now it's mostly focused on the SEALs who, we already know him and have worked with him, but the goal is to spread out the organization to the entire military and federal agencies to give them, a kind of a membership basically, so that if they get persecuted, whether it's, they turn down someone asking for, to get paid to go abort their child, or whether they, someone turns down a transgender surgery, or whether someone just gets a religious exemption denied in the future, he wants to be ready with the not only the funds but kind of the defense preset to keep Christians and common sense individuals, keep them free. And so I
Hmm.
would ask people who are listening to this, go check out Stand with Warriors. And if you feel moved or called, donate to him, and at least follow him and keep track of what's going on, because he's the guy who's kind of on the forefront of all these legal issues in the military.
I interviewed him. I interviewed him on the podcast a year and a half ago, something like that, at ReformCon. I did a live podcast with him, but
Oh,
I'll
nice.
speak with him again. So
Yeah.
the picture that you're painting from inside the military of, abortion and people being actively persecuted for not getting the vaccine, and, you know white privilege training, and all these different things. It I don't quite know how to put it, but it feels almost heartbreaking. Like, this is not the picture of the military that I grew up with, that I saw reflected in movies that I loved. Obviously, movies are fiction, and so there's more complicated realities to it, but certainly it seems like, I don't know, maybe I'll ask you, like, do you ever speak to veterans, like, say, World War II or Vietnam? Maybe Vietnam isn't the best example, but veterans who got out before this current era, and relay your experiences, and do they say things like, and maybe you've had these conversations, maybe you haven't, but do they say things like, yeah, the military's always been a mess in that way? Or they're like, I can't even begin to imagine the scale of mess that you're dealing with. Like, is this a continuation of how the military has always been behind the scenes, or is it how it feels, which is like it's way worse than it's ever been?
You know, Unfortunately, I don't have too many contacts with that older generation. But what I will
Hmm.
say is, for very good reason, for the last 20 to 40 years, decades now, the military has been the most trusted institution in America. And I'm sure Hollywood and stuff has a little bit to do with that, but that's not
Sure.
all fake. It's coming, there's a kernel of truth in it. And that truth was kind of back what we talked about, that whole meritocracy idea. The cream of the crop rises to the top. We had Eisenhower and Patton, Grant and all these other guys who were tactical, geniuses or leaders of men, courageous, and they rise to the top because they were good at what they do. And when they made a mistake, you own up to it, or you pay the man, right? We have a saying, if you make a mistake, you pay the man. You do something dumb in training, you got tire drags or something else, where you have to pay to to make the wrongs right. And that's historically how the military has been. And so, has the military made mistakes in the past? Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
But they pay the man for it, whether it's through Congress, public opinion, people getting court-martialed, fired, whatever it is, demoted. We had that in our culture. That was ingrained in us. We were men of integrity who stood for truth. And over the last definitely 2 years, I would push it back to the Obama administration. more and more that meritocracy has been erased. And so,
Mm,
you know, the trust in the military as an institution is crumbling. And I mean, my dad can speak to it. I can't speak to, you know, very many
okay.
Vietnam or World War II vets, but my dad was in 27 years. He got out in the Obama administration. He firsthand saw there was a minor purge of field grade officers, so kind of that '06 to admiral, where Obama fired or forced retired a lot of senior military leadership, and that's where you get these kind of failures of generals like Lloyd Austin, who got promoted through the ranks, even though they had less than stellar careers, but they were just known to be someone who would say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and he got promoted up to a 4-star, gets out, and he gets put in as Secretary of Defense. We see
Mm,
General Milley, who's a complete failure. You know, has a ribbon rack from his collarbone to his belly button. But what has he done in his life? He's lost 2 wars. And when, you know, President Trump, his senior officer, you know, or senior commander, was telling him to do things, was actively behind his back calling other foreign nations, trying to counteract his boss. And so we see these political animals and these yes men getting promoted through the ranks, and it is destroying trust because there's been zero accountability, which is historically the antithesis of what the military culture stood for. So again, it's not irreversible. We just need those in power to do something about it. We need Congress to pull in these generals, admirals, and hold their feet to the fire, figure out why they experimented on their troops knowingly, why they blanket denied religious accommodations, which is illegal. We need actual hearings to hold these people accountable. And then we need lawyers like Davis Younts who are courageous enough to take the fight to them to put an end to this. And we can restore trust quickly. And the way you do that is you restore the meritocracy. The best of the best rise to the top. And if you're not good at your job, you get out or you get punished, you know? Um, so it's sad, but it's obvious.
amen to all of that. What can people do to support you personally?
Um, Follow me on Twitter, read my articles from the Sentinel if you want to. You know, I'm not doing much right now in the way of, you know, actual, you know, monetary or, you know, kind of physical support, but you know, I would love people to pray over me, pray over the documentary. I hope that it, you know, gets eyeballs and people who are it might motivate and inform people to start their own fights, because that's what we need. We just need more people with the knowledge and courage to stand for truth.
Amen. Yeah, I purposefully tried to avoid too many discussions of topics that are specifically in the documentary because I wanted to lend context around it so people will go and watch it and support the documentary and spread it. There are some very powerful and very moving scenes that I think everyone should go check out.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching it yourself.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, well, this has been wonderful. You want to send people to Twitter to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. It's just I think it's Asa underscore Miller. But I'll get with you offline.
Cool, cool, man. I'll look it up. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.